Concerns are looming over how it will impact one of West Virginia's top exports, coal. Well, West Virginia Coal Association says with China levying a 15% tariff on us coals, they're actually worried that the country could come to turn to other countries to meet their energy needs. The association says the impact depends on a number of factors. It began with silence, the kind that settles over empty ports when the cranes stop moving from Houston to Norfolk, from New Orleans to Baltimore. The heartbeat of America's coal trade has gone still. In just 6 months, us coal exports have collapsed by a staggering 94%, the sharpest fall in modern history. A 130 billion export engine brought to its knees, trains that once thundered across Appalachia now sit frozen on the tracks. Conveyor belts idle, barges rust in the Gulf Sunday. No hurricane, no strike, no war. Just policy. Washington's latest tariff move a 1.5 million docking fee on every Chinese-built bulk carrier entering us ports was meant to rebalance trade. Instead, it has strangled it. More than 70% of America's outbound coal fleet was built, leased, or maintained in China. Overnight, those ships vanished from the schedule. Cargoes were stranded. Contracts evaporated. Logistics costs exploded by 200 to 300%. In West Virginia and Kentucky, miners checked their phones not for pay alerts, but for closure notices. In Montana, rail sidings overflow with unsold stockpiles. Industry analysts estimate 4.8 billion in losses during the first quarter alone as foreign buyers turn to Australia, Indonesia, and South Africa for supply. The ripple effect devastating. Fuel companies have started cutting shifts. Port authorities report tens of thousands of indirect job losses from welders and mechanics to cafe owners serving dock workers breakfast. The once steady of America's energy backbone has faded into anxious quiet. Economists warn this isn't just a market correction. It's a structural fracture. When coal moves, money moves. Insurance, freight, steel, electricity all tied to the same black dust. And when that dust stops moving, the entire chain tightens. Rural counties lose tax revenue. Local schools lose funding. Towns built on the promise of extraction now face extinction. For decades, coal wasn't just fuel. It was faith, a symbol of labor, grit, and national power. But tonight, that faith is being tested like never before. Was this collapse inevitable? The price of an energy transition the world can't avoid. Or is it a self-inflicted wound from policies written with good intent, but disastrous reach? One thing is certain, America's coal belt has entered uncharted territory, And the silence in its ports is only the beginning. It was meant to be a show of strength, but in Washington's rush to rebalance trade with Beijing, the strike landed squarely on home ground. What was designed as a geopolitical maneuver, a 1.5 million docking fee on Chinese-built cargo ships, has become one of the most costly self-inflicted wounds in recent US trade history. Officials framed it as protection, but when the ships stopped coming, protection turned into paralysis. Coal exports, America's once mighty black gold, had no vessels left to carry them. Mines stayed full, ports stayed quiet. The global supply chain, built over decades, snapped in weeks. The intent was to weaken Chinese influence over US logistics. The result, a logistical meltdown at home. 70% of bulk carriers used in American coal trade are Chinese-made, meaning the moment those ships were hit with the new tariff, they disappeared from the charter lists. Freight rates tripled, insurance premiums doubled. A single shipment that cost 40 per ton in 2024 now costs nearly 120. Buyers fled overnight. Across the Pacific, Australia and Indonesia moved fast. Within 3 months, Australia's coal exports to Asia jumped 12%. Indonesia's rose 9%. Together, they pocketed an estimated $7.4 billion in new trade revenue that once flowed through US ports. Japan, South Korea, and Taiwan quietly wrote long-term contracts, locking in Asian suppliers for the next 5 years. In Washington, the numbers look abstract. GDP adjustments, policy memos, trade balances, but in West Virginia or Kentucky, it's personal. Families who've mined for generations now face layoffs. Empty shifts, unpaid mortgages. The ripple hits everything from grocery stores and gas stations to local tax bases, funding schools and hospitals. One political decision rippled through the economy like a seismic wave, shattering trust in what was once seen as strategic planning. Economists are calling it the energy export paradox. A nation rich in fuel but poor in ships. A 4.8 billion quarterly loss, not because America ran out of coal, but because it ran out of carriers. The irony is painful and the lesson unmistakable. Global trade isn't just about resources. It's about movement. No allies question Washington's judgment. Industry groups call for reversals. And within the corridors of power, quiet doubts grow louder. Was this about strength or about symbolism gone too far? For every ton of coal now stranded, another question burns hotter. How many more protective policies can the US afford before the next domino falls? The collapse didn't just hit Wall Street. It hit Main Street in the coal towns of Appalachia, Wyoming, and the Great Plains. Silence becoming the new soundtrack of daily life. Freight yards, once packed with rail cars, now stand deserted. Diners that opened before dawn now stay dark. Storefronts carry faded. For lease signs and pickup trucks sit idle outside shuttered mines. Each closure is more than a statistic. It's a funeral for a way of life. When one mine shuts down, 300 to 400 workers lose their jobs, and with them, 1,000 others in small businesses that depended on their paychecks. Mechanics, grocers, barbers, cafe owners all caught in the same downward spiral. Economists estimate that these closures are stripping more than 2.1 billion a year from local economies in lost income and tax revenue. In Logan County, West Virginia, unemployment has surged to 22%, double the national average. The school district there reported a 30% rise in student meal programs, a sign of deepening poverty. In Pike County, Kentucky, county officials say the local hospital is operating in the red for the first time in a decade. When coal goes, one mayor said, everything goes with it. And while America's mining towns sink deeper into crisis, others half a world away are booming. In Queensland, Australia, and Kalimantan, Indonesia, new coal terminals are rising on coastlines that used to be quiet fishing hubs. Over 30,000 new jobs have been created since mid-2024 as those countries rush to fill the supply vacuum left by the United States. Australian exports have soared, Indonesian ports expanded, and global buyers barely look back. The contrast is stark. In West Virginia, families pack up and leave. In Queensland, they're hiring. One market's pain has become another's prosperity. The same coal that once powered us, cities now fuels Asian growth shipped through foreign ports, loaded onto non-American vessels, under contracts, signed in currencies other than the dollar. Community leaders call it the slow bleed. Churches hold meetings to keep morale alive. Town halls debate retraining programs that don't yet exist. For many, it's not just about losing jobs, it's about losing purpose, identity, and pride. The coal country spirit, once built on grit and faith, now faces a question no one dares to answer out loud. If the nation built on energy no longer needs its miners, what happens to the towns that built the nation? One truth remains: the collapse of coal exports isn't just an economic failure. It's a human one. They used to call it the heartbeat of America. Now it's a pulse fading in silence in the coal towns of Appalachia, Pennsylvania, and Wyoming. Men who once dug the power that let the nation now stand in unemployment lines that stretch around the block. Some worked underground for 30 years. Fathers, sons, brothers, all suddenly replaced by nothing. We kept the lights on for America, says one miner outside a shuttered facility in Beckley, West Virginia. Now no one remembers we exist. His words hang heavy, not as complaint, but as confession. Across the heartland, trust has collapsed as fast as the market. In the last 3 months, the 20 largest US coal companies have lost 28% of their stock value. Over $5.6 billion in planned investments are frozen, halted mid-construction, or abandoned altogether. Excavators sit idle in half-dug pits. Investors, once bullish on coal's rebound, are quietly exiting, pulling capital into natural gas and renewables. The message from Wall Street is clear. The future has moved on, yet in the coal fields, that future feels like betrayal. For decades, these communities were told they were indispensable. Indispensable, that America would always need their labor, their sweat, their sacrifice. But now, the very industry they built is vanishing from beneath their boots. Families are pawning tools, selling trucks, leaving towns that no longer offer hope. The numbers are brutal. Indonesia's coal exports hit 50 billion in 2025, the highest in its history. Australia, now the world's top supplier of metallurgical coal, has just inked 4 new long-term deals with Japan and South Korea. The US, once a dominant player, has slipped below 10 billion in annual coal trade, a fall that few thought possible. At the local diners of Kentucky and Ohio, the conversation has turned bitter. They told us globalization would lift all boats, says a former foreman. Turns out, it just sank ours first. The tone isn't anger anymore. It's disbelief. A generation that once took pride in feeding America's industrial engine now feels like collateral damage in a game they never chose to play. Coal built schools, hospitals, and highways. It powered wars and cities. But today, it powers a memory. The collapse isn't just financial, it's spiritual. It's the slow erosion of faith in a system that promised security and delivered silence. And as night falls over the hollows of West Virginia, one question lingers: when the people who power the nation lose their purpose, who powers them? It's not just an American crisis, it's a global pivot. For the first time in over a century, coal is no longer the backbone of industrial power. From Washington to Warsaw, from Tokyo to Jakarta, the world's energy map is being redrawn, and the United States is watching from the sidelines. Between 2008 and 2025, US coal production has fallen by nearly 50%, wiping out more than 400 million tons per year. What was once the fuel that powered half of America's electricity grid now makes up barely 15% of generation. Just this year alone, 23 coal-fired power plants have shut down for good, victims of market forces. Aging infrastructure and cheaper alternatives. Natural gas and renewables now dominate the energy market, costing 25 to 30%, less than coal per megawatt hour. Wind farms rise where mine shafts once dug deep. Solar arrays spread across the plains that once echoed with the rumble of coal trains. For Wall Street investors, the shift isn't ideological, it's mathematical. Profit follows efficiency, and coal can no longer compete. Globally, the numbers tell the same story. The European Union has cut coal consumption by 43% in the past 5 years, accelerating its transition to hydrogen, solar, and nuclear. Japan and South Korea, once major buyers of US coal, have turned away not out of politics, but practicality. Rising insurance and shipping costs have made US coal simply too expensive. Instead, they now rely on steady flows from Australia and Indonesia, two nations that have mastered both scale and logistics. In energy markets, every closure opens a door somewhere else. Indonesia's low-cost mining operations and new deepwater ports are fueling a record $50 billion export boom. Australia, backed by state investment and long-term contracts with Asian utilities, has secured its dominance in metallurgical coal. America, meanwhile, is losing its footing in a race it once led. But this isn't just a business transition, it's a societal reckoning. What happens when a nation built on fossil strength must now reinvent itself in a cleaner, faster, cheaper world? Can the same political system that subsidized coal for a century adapt to a market that has already moved on? As the turbines spin and solar fields bloom, one truth becomes impossible to ignore. The future of energy is no longer measured in tons of coal, but in megawatts of change. It's not just a downturn anymore. It's a retreat from the trading floors of Singapore to the ports of Rotterdam. The message is clear. America's coal no longer leads the market. It follows it, once a dominant supplier of energy to Asia and Europe. The United States is now struggling to find buyers in a world that has already moved on. Between 2023 and 2 per 2025, US coal exporters have lost more than $15 billion in contract value, a collapse unmatched since the Great Recession. Insurance premiums for bulk carriers have surged 60%, driving up shipping costs and wiping out any price advantage American suppliers once had. The result: record stockpiles at the ports of Norfolk. Mobile And New Orleans, more than 22 million tons of coal now sit untouched, the highest level in a decade. Traders describe it as a market freeze. The buyers didn't disappear. One analyst says they just found better deals elsewhere, and that elsewhere is Australia and Indonesian nations that now dominate over 70% of Asia's metallurgical coal supply, while the US has fallen to just 3% of global market share, down from 9% in 2018. The shift wasn't sudden, it was structural. Australia invested early in automation and port capacity. Indonesia built new rail corridors, cutting costs and securing long-term buyers from Japan. South Korea and India. Meanwhile, Washington's policy gridlock, tariffs, environmental reviews, and aging infrastructure slowed everything down. By the time American exporters adjusted, competitors had already locked in multi-year contracts. In Tokyo and Seoul, the numbers did the talking. US coal, once a stable bet, became a logistical headache. Delays, higher freight rates, unpredictable regulation. For steelmakers and utilities, reliability mattered more than nostalgia. We can't build our future on American uncertainty, said one Korean energy official. That sentence, quiet, polite, devastating, captured the moment. Europe followed suit, facing its own green transition. The EU cut coal imports by 43% in 5 years, favoring renewables and low-carbon alternatives. The US didn't just lose buyers, it lost relevance. Back home, the ripple is unmistakable. Port towns dependent on export taxes are bleeding revenue. Investment funds are pivoting to cleaner energy. Even the miners know this isn't a pause. It's a pivot. Global energy is a race. And America, once far ahead, now finds itself chasing its own shadow. The question is no longer if the coal era will end, but whether the nation that once fueled the world can find its place in what comes next. It ends not with an explosion, but with a silence. The mines once roared, the rails once shook, the ports once burned with light. But now the coal that built a century of American power lies, still buried under dust and time. Once called King Coal, it now feels more like an artifact, a monument to an age of smoke and steel. Across Appalachia and the Midwest, the numbers tell a story of transition and reckoning. US coal exports down 94%, production cut in half since 2008. 23 power plants closed in a single year. Yet beyond those numbers are faces, fathers who spent 30 years underground, sons who never got the chance to follow them, and towns that no longer echo with the rhythm of shift bells. Coal is no longer America's energy crown. It's an industrial memory, one that carries both pride and pain. For decades, it fueled wars, cities, and dreams. But now, as wind turbines rise over old mine lands and solar fields stretch across abandoned rail yards, a new question looms: can these communities survive the very progress they helped create? Experts say the path forward isn't about nostalgia. It's about reinvention. To rebuild the heartland, the nation must invest 7 to 10 billion every year in clean energy transition programs, retraining miners, funding solar startups, and expanding access to new industries like carbon capture, CCUS, and green hydrogen. These aren't distant dreams. They're lifelines. Each new technology could mean thousands of jobs, billions in new tax revenue, and the revival of regions that once powered the world. But it will take courage, because what's collapsing isn't just an industry, it's an identity. For generations, coal miners were the foundation of America's strength. They stood for grit, endurance, and pride. Now they're being asked to trade hard hats for circuit boards, to dig not into the earth, but into the future. And yet, hope persists. In West Virginia, community colleges are teaching renewable energy skills. In Pennsylvania, former miners are wiring wind farms. In Ohio, abandoned strip mines are being reborn as battery storage fields. Slowly, painfully, the old black horizon is turning green. Still, the choice ahead is larger than any one town or state. It's a national crossroad between the comfort of what was and the promise of what could be. The coal that once gave America its light now challenges it to find a new one. If the nation can summon the same ingenuity that once built its railroads and mills, it might yet turn loss into leadership. But if it hesitates, politics outrun progress. The silence spreading through its mining towns could become permanent, because as the world races toward clean energy, America still stands at the intersection between the black past and the green horizon. So the question now isn't just economic, it's moral. Will the United States have the courage to bury its last lump of coal, to ignite a brighter, cleaner future for itself